Okay, this video is to help you with page 12 in your Talmud notes. Just as a reminder, we had previously studied the Mishnah that discussed that the Torah mentioned several examples of items that must be returned, but it also gave a general statement, a klal. It mentioned that you must return all the lost items of your neighbor. So the Mishnah was discussing, if it mentions a general statement that includes everything, why is it necessary to mention something like, for example, a garment? If you have to return any lost item, that includes the garment. So why mention the garment? So now we're going to study a couple of comments of Rashi in this Mishnah. 3 words to help us. Number 1 is the word stam, which means usual or plain. Bidei Adam means something that is made by the hands of men, as opposed to something that's natural. Hefker means ownerless. It refers to property that is not owned by anybody, items, things that don't belong to anybody, that's ownerless. Okay, the Dibur HaMatkil of Rashi is Lama Yatzat. The Mishnah was asking, why was it singled out? That's what it means, Lama Yatzat. Why was it taken out, or why was it singled out? The question that Rashi is going to discuss is, singled out in what way? What was it taken out from? When the Mishnah said the garment was taken out, it was taken out from what? So Rashi explains, V'chen ta'aseh lesimlato. The translation is, and so shall you do for his garment. Okay, these words are words that the Mishnah quoted from the Torah. It's part of the Pasuk. And that's what singling out garment. It's saying specifically, do this, meaning return the garment as well. So by doing that, the Torah is especially including the garment in the mitzvah of returning those items. And the Mishnah was asking, why was that necessary? If you said return all the items, that includes a garment. So why does he have to exclude it? And it's excluding it by saying, V'chen ta'aseh lesimlato, so shall you do to his garment. It's singling out, especially mentioning a garment. Why is that? So then the Mishnah explained that an example, like we always use examples, we use examples to teach something. And the Mishnah explained what that is teaching us. It says, Rashi, stam simla yesh ba simanim. A usual garment, a regular garment, has a siman, has a sign. Because again, not all garment, not all clothing are the same. Even if you look at shirts, right? Not all shirts are the same. There's many different sizes, colors, fabrics, designs, patterns, logos. Some people even put their names on shirts. So a regular garment has a siman. Most garments have a siman, has something that makes them unique. That's what a sign is. V'chol simla yesh la ba'alim tovim ota. Every garment has a ba'alim, an owner, who's claiming it. Meaning, if somebody loses a sweater, somebody loses a pair of pants, somebody loses a jacket, there's an owner who's going to be looking for it. And then Rashi explains, Shelo na'asit, the shoresh is asa, ela bidei adam, because it wasn't made except for by a person, meaning the garment was made by a person. No garment makes itself. Clothing is something that is created, is designed by people. It wasn't made by itself. Velo bat, the shoresh is ba'a, mean a hefker. It didn't come from something that is ownerless, meaning every garment at some point had an owner. Maybe it doesn't have an owner now, but every single garment that exists at some point was owned by someone. Either somebody made it, so they owned it. Somebody bought it, so they own it. So that's the point of a garment. A garment is a perfect example of something that has two aspects. One is that it has an owner, and the other one is that it has simanim. Their garments are different from each other. So therefore, the Mishnah said a garment was singled out from the general rule to teach us these two aspects. When the Torah said return every lost item, that includes everything. When the Torah then goes ahead and gives us an example, the example is trying to teach us something. It's trying to teach us, what does it mean, return all items? All items that are similar to a garment. In what way? In that, number one, they have a siman, they have a sign. Number two, they have a claimer. And those and only those type of things must one return. If it doesn't have an owner, you don't have to return it. If it doesn't have a siman, because the item is a common item, there are many of the same, there's no way for the owner to identify it and show that it's his, you don't have to announce it. Questions on Rashi. The Mishnah mentioned that simla, clothing, was yatzat, went out. Okay, it went out from where? So now we know. It went from where? From the general statement that said in the Torah, so shall you do for all lost items. It was excluded from that rule, because if you would have just simply said return all lost items, that includes the garment. So when the Torah goes ahead and mentions the garment, it is singling it out, it is excluding it from the rule. Number two, explain what Rashi means by stam simla yesh ba simanim. What does it mean that a usual, regular clothing has a siman? So now you know, garments generally have simanim, they're different from each other. Why is that true? Because there are many different kinds of clothing. Sizes, fabrics, designs. Next, how do we know that a simla has tovim, has claimers? So Rashi explained. A garment is a very good example of something that had an owner. Why? Because garments, clothing, does not make itself. Clothing was made by someone. Somebody owned it at some point. So that's a good example of something that is owned, as opposed to animals, because not all animals are owned. There are many, many, many animals that grow up in the wild that nobody owns them. So the Torah purposely chose an example of clothing to explain to us that lost items must have two aspects in order to be included in the mitzvah of Shabbat Avidah. They must have a siman and they must have an owner. Okay, then the words for the next Rashi. Lemeute is from the word me'at. Me'at means a little. Lemeute means to exclude. To exclude means that you're leaving something out. You're reducing the application of a general statement. Meaning, the general statement, it seems to be very general, very broad, meaning including many things. Lemeute means that now we're showing that that general statement should not be taken so generally, but it's more limited. Midi, something. And none is a suffix that means that we. It's plural, we. Av kol sheyesh lo tovim. The dibur matril of Rashi is, so to anything that has a claimer. Okay, the question that Rashi is going to be discussing is, what is that teaching us? And it points out, lemeute mide de yadinan. We know that nan is a suffix. The shorish is yud dalet ayin, yada. Lemeute mide de yadinan be demiyayish. It is excluding something that we know that the owner gave up hope. Meaning, at some point, when we lose something, we look for it, we put up signs, We make some effort to find the item, but at some point we realize we're not going to get it, so we give up hope. So after we give up hope, it's because we start looking for the item. We might actually go get a new one because we give up hope on the old one. The old one becomes ownerless. We gave up on it. It's not ours anymore. So the idea of having a claimer means that he's active. He's still looking for his item. He didn't give up hope. So says Rashi, when the owner stops looking for the item, so the owner gives up hope and the item becomes ownerless. There's no mitzvah to return it anymore. We're only obligated to return an item as long as it's reasonable to assume that the owner is still looking for his item. Once a reasonable amount of time has passed by, we can assume that the owner gave up hope, the item is ownerless. So besides items that were never owned by anyone, like for example, fish in the sea, or let's say there's wild fruit, there's wild animals. All of those things are ownerless. They were never owned by someone. So besides that type of thing, what else is considered as items that have no claimer? And this is very relevant. When else is there no claimer? When the owner gives up hope. Then the item that he previously owned is now ownerless. You don't have to return that. So this is what the Mishnah is teaching us. When the Torah says return every item and return the clothing, clothing is there to teach us these two aspects of the mitzvah. That we only have to return items as long as they have a siman, something that can be used as a distinguishing mark, something to describe the object that shows that it's yours. And the other one is that it has to have a claimer. If it does not have a claimer, then that's excluded from the mitzvah. Lemeute, it's excluded from the mitzvah of returning it, because once the owner gave up hope, the item is ownerless.